Welcome to the deep dive.
Yeah.
Today we're going deep on Bitcoin,
Oh, yeah.
inflation, and those alternative investments everyone keeps talking about.
Very
So
good.
we're talking Bitcoin, precious metals, even real estate. Those assets that don't really follow the usual stock and bond rules.
Yeah, yeah,
It makes you wonder,
yeah.
is my money actually safe just sitting there in the bank?
It's a big question these days, for sure.
Yeah, and we've got a whole bunch of research, investor insights. We even got some thoughts from some corporate
Oh,
CFOs.
wow.
And those guys are thinking really outside the box.
Love that.
All to answer one question. What does this all mean for you?
That's what we're here to find out.
So one thing that really jumps out from our research is this whole idea of global liquidity. It
Yeah.
sounds kind of complicated, but it's basically just the amount of money like sloshing around the world,
Right.
ready to be invested.
Yeah.
And apparently, Bitcoin is really sensitive to it.
It is.
What's the big takeaway there for our listeners?
Well, what's interesting is Bitcoin might actually be like the purest measure of this global liquidity.
Oh, interesting.
Think about it.
Mm.
Unlike stocks, Bitcoin doesn't have company earnings or dividends
Right.
affecting its price. And unlike gold, it's not tied to like industrial demand
Yeah.
or even what central banks decide to do.
Right.
Bitcoin just is.
Okay, so it's like a financial lone wolf out there
Yeah.
roaming the global markets.
Exactly.
I like that.
Yeah.
But our sources say this sensitivity to liquidity, it's tied to some key characteristics of Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Like, it's scarce, only 21 million will ever exist.
Right.
And it's accessible globally.
Mm.
Anyone with an internet connection can buy it.
Yeah.
So when there's a flood of money looking for a home,
Yeah.
Bitcoin's ready to ride that wave.
That's right. Exactly.
We saw this happen in 2021.
Oh, yeah.
All that stimulus money flooding the market.
Yeah.
Bitcoin's price went through the roof, even as interest rates were going up.
That's right.
That's crazy.
It really is wild. It kind of goes against everything we thought we knew about how markets work.
Right. It's like throwing a party and watching one guest just completely take over, even though the music's getting louder.
I like that analogy.
But our sources point to something called fiscal dominance.
Yeah.
Explain this. I'll be honest.
Yeah.
I wasn't really clear on this before going through all this research.
So imagine a government printing money like crazy to fund its projects,
Okay.
even when interest rates are going up.
Yeah.
It's kind of like putting your foot on the gas and the brake at the same time.
Oh.
The car might still move forward, but it's going to be unstable.
That makes sense.
Right.
So even though the Fed was trying to slow things down by raising rates, governments were spending like there's no tomorrow,
Totally.
which kept all that money flowing.
Yeah.
And Bitcoin being so sensitive
Yeah.
reacted big time.
Absolutely. That's a great way to put it.
And this brings up a big question.
Yep.
How long can this go on? Can governments just keep spending their way out of trouble forever?
Right.
And what happens to Bitcoin when the music stops?
Those are some great questions for our listeners to ponder, for sure.
Definitely some food for thought.
Mm-hmm.
But here's where things get really interesting. Our sources suggest that corporations,
Yeah.
those big companies,
Mm-hmm.
the ones that are usually super careful with their money,
Right.
they're starting to see Bitcoin not just as a gamble, but as a way to actually protect their money.
Absolutely. You're seeing this seismic shift in how companies think.
Yeah.
CFOs, the ones who are like guarding all the company's cash, they're starting to see the dollar itself as risky.
Interesting.
Bitcoin's scarcity and independence from governments make it really appealing.
Yeah.
It's like they're saying, wait a minute,
Yeah.
maybe cash isn't king anymore.
It's like they're flipping the script on Wall Street.
Yeah. Yeah.
We actually have a real-world example of this. MicroStrategy.
Oh, yeah?
They went all in on Bitcoin.
They did.
And their stock performance has been amazing.
It's been phenomenal. It really has.
MicroStrategy is a really interesting case study because it gets people talking.
It really does. Some people think it's reckless.
Yeah.
Others say it's brilliant.
Yeah.
But the key takeaway is that corporations are starting to think differently. They're starting to see Bitcoin as a hedge against inflation, a way to protect themselves from the shrinking value of the dollar.
So it's not just about making a quick buck.
No.
It's about surviving in the long run.
Exactly. In a world where the old rules don't seem to apply anymore.
And this isn't just something big companies are doing.
Nope.
Our sources highlighted small businesses
Yeah.
that are benefiting from holding Bitcoin too.
It seems like investors of all sizes are starting to wake up to the potential here.
It's like the cool kids are doing it and now everyone wants in.
Uh-huh. Right.
But it's important to remember there's no one-size-fits-all approach here.
Absolutely.
Right.
Some companies might take a play-it-safe approach,
Yeah.
using Bitcoin mostly as a hedge against inflation.
Right.
Others might go all in,
Yeah.
trying to buy as much as possible.
Yeah.
It depends on their appetite for risk,
Right.
their understanding of Bitcoin,
Yeah.
and their overall strategy.
So it sounds like there are a lot of different ways to approach this.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Speaking of legendary investors and strategies,
Uh-huh.
Paul Tudor Jones, the guy who predicted the '87 crash,
Mm-hmm.
he's been talking a lot about inflation lately.
He has.
And he's saying we need to take a multi-asset approach to hedging.
Yeah.
Like Bitcoin, gold, commodities,
Mm-hmm.
even the NASDAQ.
Right, which is interesting because it shows the limits of traditional portfolios.
I see.
Bonds and cash, which used to be the safest bets,
Right.
are starting to look a little shaky.
Especially with all this inflation going on.
Exactly.
So are we going to start seeing companies build these multi-asset hedges?
That's the question, isn't it?
Will they start adding things like gold,
Yeah.
commodities,
Yeah.
maybe even stocks to the mix alongside Bitcoin?
Right.
And how do you even manage a portfolio like that?
Exactly.
These are some things our listeners might want to think about.
Definitely some things to consider.
Another interesting perspective we found comes from Anthony Deaton.
Mm.
He's a big believer in gold
Yeah.
as a way to avoid risk.
Yeah.
His philosophy really resonates with a lot of Bitcoin people who see it as like a risk-off asset
Mm.
in a world that feels increasingly risky.
Yeah, it really challenges the idea that Bitcoin is inherently risky.
Yeah.
Maybe holding Bitcoin is actually a way to reduce certain risks that are just baked into the system.
Yeah.
You know?
It's like choosing a sturdy lifeboat in a storm
I like that.
instead of clinging to a sinking ship.
Yeah.
So it comes down to how you define risk.
It really does.
In a world of all this money printing, geopolitical instability,
Yeah.
maybe holding assets outside the control of governments and central banks is actually the safest thing you can do.
It might be. It really might be.
Let's shift gears a little bit and talk about stablecoins.
Oh, yeah?
Another fascinating development in this whole digital asset world.
They have exploded in popularity.
They have.
And they're playing a growing role in the global financial system.
Yeah, it's like they came out of nowhere
Yeah.
while we were busy arguing about Bitcoin.
Just go ahead.
What I find really interesting about stablecoins is that they could potentially make the dollar's dominance even stronger
Yeah, that's a really interesting point.
because they make it more accessible digitally.
Right.
But they also highlight the risks of centralized systems. Remember what happened with Silicon Valley Bank?
Oh, yeah.
It showed just how fragile those stablecoins are,
It did.
especially the ones that rely on traditional banks,
Yep.
which emphasizes how important decentralization is.
Yeah,
And that's one of Bitcoin's biggest strengths.
absolutely.
Bitcoin isn't tied to any one company
Right.
or government,
Mhm.
so it's immune to those kinds of meltdowns.
It's like keeping your money in a vault
Yeah.
where no one person has the key.
And this brings up a really interesting question about the future of money.
It does.
Will stablecoins pave the way for central bank digital currencies where governments control everything?
Right.
Or will Bitcoin become more widely accepted as a better form of money?
It's a battle between centralized and decentralized systems.
Yeah,
And the outcome will have huge implications for global finance.
absolutely. It's like a tug of war for the future of money.
I like that.
And we're all caught in the middle.
Yeah, we are.
Our sources also talk about how Bitcoin encourages a shift towards long-term thinking,
It does.
both for investors
Mm-hmm.
and for society as a whole.
I think that's one of the most interesting aspects of it.
It's like we're moving away from that get-rich-quick mentality
Totally.
and starting to embrace longer time horizons.
Like decades instead of days.
Exactly.
That shift is really profound.
It is.
And it could change how we approach some of the biggest problems we're facing. Well, if we can break free from that short-term thinking that's holding us back,
Yeah.
we might actually make progress on things like climate change,
Yeah.
poverty,
Yeah.
inequality.
It's like finally looking up from our phones
Uh-huh.
and seeing the bigger picture.
Yep.
Our sources suggest this is already starting to happen. Bitcoin investors are known for their patience,
They are.
their willingness to ride out those ups and downs
Yeah.
for those long-term gains.
It's totally different from that get-rich-quick mindset
Right.
that drives speculation in other assets.
It's like planting a tree and
Yeah.
watching it grow into a mighty oak
Right.
versus just grabbing a few apples off someone else's tree.
I like that.
And it raises an important question. Can Bitcoin's focus on the long term spread to other areas of society?
That's a great question.
Can it inspire new innovations, encourage sustainable practices,
Yeah.
foster a greater sense of responsibility for the future?
I think it has the potential to do all of those things.
It's almost like Bitcoin is a giant social experiment as much as a tech one.
It is.
We're seeing how a new form of money can actually influence human behavior
Right.
and change our relationship with time and value.
Absolutely.
And this experiment is happening right now.
It is.
It's exciting, it's unpredictable,
Definitely.
and it has the potential to change the world.
I agree.
Now let's talk about how investors approach Bitcoin from an information perspective.
Okay.
Our sources highlighted some really interesting insights there.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like there's a big emphasis on going beyond just the headlines.
Yeah.
And really digging into the data.
Absolutely. There's a real DIY ethos in the Bitcoin community.
Yeah.
People are encouraged to do their own research, question everything,
Yeah.
and form their own opinions. It's very different from just passively consuming information,
Right.
which is what we often see in other areas of finance.
It's like Bitcoin is a crash course in critical thinking.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah. You're forced to become your own analyst,
Yep.
researcher, fact checker.
Right.
It's pretty empowering.
It is.
And this emphasis on independent thinking,
Yeah.
it shows up in the types of sources Bitcoin investors use.
Mm-hmm.
They're not just reading mainstream news or watching financial pundits on TV.
Right.
They're diving into research reports,
Yeah.
exploring blockchain data, having these deep conversations online.
They're going straight to the source.
Yeah.
Cutting through the noise.
And our sources even pointed to some specific resources, like AllianceBernstein's Black Book and BlackRock's presentations on Bitcoin,
Those are great resources.
as examples of the high-quality info that's out there,
They are.
if you're willing to look for it.
Exactly.
And don't forget the footnotes.
Oh, yeah.
So often they have these hidden gems of information that can help you understand the context and nuance of an argument.
Absolutely. Sometimes the most important insights are hidden in the details.
And here's a pro tip for our listeners.
Okay.
Don't just read stuff you agree with.
Yeah.
Seek out different perspectives.
Right.
Challenge your own assumptions and be open to changing your mind.
That's how you grow as an investor
Yeah.
and as a thinker.
It's about acknowledging that we all have blind spots and being humble enough to admit when we're wrong.
Right. The best investors are always learning.
Always evolving.
Exactly.
Now, speaking of being wrong,
Oh.
a lot of people forget about inflation when they evaluate their investments.
Yeah, that's a big one.
In a world where prices are constantly rising,
Right.
it's super important to understand how inflation can erode the value of your savings, your investments.
Over time.
Our sources really emphasize the importance of understanding real returns.
Yeah.
It's the return on your investment after you factor in inflation.
Right.
It's a simple idea,
It is.
but it's easy to overlook.
Especially if you're new to investing.
And this is where that idea of risk-free assets like bonds and cash starts to fall apart.
It really does.
If your safe investments are earning less than inflation, you're actually losing buying power.
You are, yeah.
It's like a slow leak in your tire.
Yeah.
You might not notice it right away, but eventually it'll leave you stranded.
I love that analogy.
It's a great way to think about it.
It is.
It really shows how inflation can sneak up on you and steal your wealth without you even realizing it.
It's a silent thief.
It is.
That's why you need to consider assets that can actually outpace inflation.
Right.
Things like Bitcoin,
Yeah.
real estate, certain commodities.
So you need to be thinking about this stuff.
You do.
And here's another challenge.
Okay.
A lot of traditional economic models don't really account for future policy changes
They go.
or unexpected events.
Right.
Things that can completely change the game.
Yeah.
Which makes it super hard to predict how inflation will play out in the years to come.
Absolutely. We're in uncharted territory here.
Yeah.
The old rules might not apply anymore.
One approach that I found really interesting comes from Sam Callahan.
Okay.
He uses the money supply growth rate,
Yeah.
which is currently around 7 or 8%, as his own personal inflation benchmark.
That's a great idea.
It's a simple but effective way to track how quickly the dollar is losing value.
It really is. It's like a built-in BS detector
Yeah.
for all those overly optimistic economic forecasts.
That pretend inflation is just going to magically disappear.
Right, right.
Exactly.
It's about being realistic
Yeah.
and recognizing that inflation is a persistent force that you need to account for in your investment decisions.
And it seems like more and more people are starting to realize that, even in mainstream finance.
Yeah.
It feels like we might be entering a period of structurally higher inflation.
Thank God.
With all this massive government debt, supply chain disruptions, demographic shifts.
Right. It's a perfect storm for rising prices.
So it sounds like it's time for some bold thinking.
It is.
Some creative solutions.
Yeah.
And maybe even a little healthy paranoia about the future of the dollar.
I agree.
Now, before we jump into the potential risks of Bitcoin, I want to circle back to something we touched on earlier.
Sure.
This psychological shift that's happening with some corporate CFOs.
Right. You mean the whole dollar's a liability thing?
Yeah, it's like they're waking up from a long dream and realizing the currency they've trusted for so long is actually losing its value.
It's a big realization.
It is.
And it's pushing them to look for alternatives.
Like Bitcoin.
Exactly.
And this isn't just happening at a few rogue companies.
Nope.
We're seeing this at major corporations, investment banks, even sovereign wealth funds.
It's pretty amazing.
So it's like the floodgates are opening.
They are.
And institutional money is starting to pour into Bitcoin.
And this trend is being driven by a growing understanding of what makes Bitcoin unique.
Yeah.
Its scarcity, decentralization, resistance to censorship.
Yeah.
These qualities are becoming more and more attractive in a world that's filled with so much uncertainty.
So for our listener who's still on the fence about Bitcoin, this could be a wake-up call.
It could.
The so-called smart money is starting to move, and those who wait too long might miss out.
They might.
But it's important to approach any investment with a healthy dose of skepticism.
Absolutely.
Do your own research before making any decisions.
Of course.
And that brings us to the topic of risks.
Right.
Bitcoin has risks.
It does.
And it's important to understand those before you invest a single dollar.
Our sources highlighted a few key areas to consider.
First, there's the risk of human error. Bitcoin's a complex system.
It is.
And there's always a chance a software bug or a developer's mistake could have unintended consequences.
It's possible.
Second, there's the risk of external attacks. While the Bitcoin network itself is incredibly secure,
it is.
Exchanges and other third-party service providers can be vulnerable to hacking and theft.
That's true.
It's crucial to choose reputable and secure platforms for your Bitcoin.
Absolutely.
And third, there's the risk of government regulation. Governments all over the world are still trying to figure out how to handle Bitcoin.
Right.
There's a chance that they could impose restrictions that make it harder to buy, sell, or use.
Yeah. It's important to stay informed about how regulations are changing. And understand the potential risks.
But even with all these risks, Bitcoin's shown incredible resilience over the years.
It has.
It's survived so many challenges, attacks, and it's come out stronger every time.
It seems like the more people try to stop it, the stronger it gets.
And as the technology improves and more people use it, these risks are likely to decrease.
That's the hope.
So for our listener who's thinking about investing in Bitcoin, what are some steps they can take to minimize these risks?
Well, first, start small.
Okay.
Don't invest more than you can afford to lose.
Good advice.
Second, use a hardware wallet.
Yeah.
To store your Bitcoin offline. That's the most secure way to protect yourself from hacking.
Right.
Third, diversify.
Okay.
Don't put all your eggs in one basket. Consider investing in other assets as well.
Yeah.
Like gold, real estate, stocks.
Alongside Bitcoin.
Exactly.
And finally, do your own research.
Absolutely.
Don't just take someone else's word for it.
Yeah.
Learn about the technology, the risks, the potential rewards before you make any decisions.
Those are all great tips.
Yeah.
And remember, investing's a marathon, not a sprint.
I like that.
Be patient. Stay disciplined. Don't let fear or greed control your decisions.
Good advice.
And if you're feeling lost or confused,
don't
be afraid to talk to a financial advisor.
Good point.
Someone you trust who can help you navigate this stuff.
Now, we've been focusing on Bitcoin, but it's important to remember that the world of digital assets is much bigger than just one cryptocurrency.
It is.
There are tons of other cryptocurrencies out there.
Yeah.
And many of them are exploring innovative solutions in areas like decentralized finance, supply chain management, digital identity.
It's an exciting space.
It is.
And it's moving incredibly fast.
So how can our listeners stay up to date on all the latest developments?
I'd recommend following thought leaders on social media,
Okay.
subscribing to newsletters,
Yeah,
attending conferences,
good advice.
and of course you can always count on the deep dive to keep you informed.
That's a great plug.
Ah,
Now, as we start to wrap up this deep dive into Bitcoin, inflation, and alternative investments, I want to leave our listeners with one final thought.
okay.
We've talked a lot about the financial side of Bitcoin,
Right.
but I think it's important to remember that it's much more than just an investment.
It is.
It's a social movement,
Yeah.
a technological revolution,
Mm-hmm.
a philosophical challenge to the way things are.
It's about empowering individuals.
Yeah.
Achieving financial freedom,
Mm-hmm.
creating a more equitable and sustainable world.
It's a story that's still being written,
It
and we can all be a part of it.
we can.
So I encourage you to explore the world of Bitcoin and digital assets with an open mind and a sense of curiosity.
Yeah.
You might be surprised by what you find.
You might.
And who knows?
Yeah.
You might even find yourself becoming a Bitcoin believer.
It happens.
Okay, before we wrap up completely,
Mm-hmm.
I want to circle back to one thing from our sources that I found really interesting.
Okay.
It's about stablecoins.
Stablecoins. Yeah, they're interesting.
They're this weird mix of traditional finance
Mm-hmm.
and the crypto world.
Right. It's like they're trying to be both cutting edge and familiar at the same time.
But here's the thing that blew my mind.
What's that?
The argument that stablecoins could actually make the dollar stronger globally.
Oh, yeah. That's a head scratcher at first glance.
Yeah, the idea is that by making US dollars more accessible digitally,
Hmm.
stablecoins could actually boost demand for them around the world.
That's the theory.
It's crazy.
It is.
Especially when you consider how many people see Bitcoin as a threat to the dollar.
It's a real twist.
But
Like
we've been saying,
Yeah.
the old rules of finance just don't seem to apply anymore.
They don't.
Things are changing so fast.
They are.
It's hard to predict how these new technologies will reshape the global monetary system.
It's like we're all on a roller coaster
Yeah.
and no one knows where it's going.
Exactly.
So it's more important than ever to think critically
Yeah.
and never stop learning.
Right?
We can't just cling to old assumptions
Yeah.
or outdated models. We have to be adaptable, stay informed, keep our minds open.
That's a great takeaway for our listeners today. So thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the world of Bitcoin, inflation, and alternative investments.
Thanks for having me.
We've covered a lot of ground,
We have.
but this is just the beginning of your journey.
Keep exploring.
Yeah.
Keep asking questions. Keep learning. The future of finance is being shaped right now,
Yeah.
and it's an incredible time to be a part of it.
Until next time on the deep dive.
See, it's kind of philosophical, isn't it?
It
This
is.
whole Bitcoin thing.
Yeah.
It's not just about numbers and technology.
No.
It's about questioning our fundamental beliefs about money and value,
Yeah.
maybe even time itself.
Speaking of questioning assumptions,
Yeah.
let's dig into this idea that Bitcoin forces you to think long term.
Okay.
Like it rewires your brain to see beyond just the next quarter or the next year and start thinking in terms of decades or even generations.
What I find fascinating is that this long-term perspective,
Yeah.
it's not just about making money.
Right.
It's about creating a more sustainable future,
Yeah.
financially and environmentally.
Right.
If we can break free from that short-term thinking,
Yeah,
that plagues so much of our world.
it does.
We might actually be able to solve problems that have seemed impossible for generations.
Our sources say this shift is already happening.
Mm-hmm.
Bitcoin investors are known for their patience,
They are.
their willingness to hold on,
Yeah.
ride out those ups and downs for those long-term gains.
It's the opposite of that get-rich-quick mentality you see in other
Yeah.
markets.
It's like the difference between planting a tree and watching it grow into this giant oak
Right.
versus just trying to grab a few quick apples off someone else's tree.
This is a perfect analogy.
So it raises an important question.
Okay.
Can Bitcoin's long-term focus actually spread to other parts of society?
I think that's the big question.
Can it inspire innovation,
Yeah.
encourage sustainable practices,
Mm-hmm.
foster a greater sense of responsibility for the future?
I think it has the potential to do all of those things.
It's like Bitcoin is this giant social experiment.
Yeah.
As much as it's a technological one,
Yeah.
we're seeing how a new form of money can actually change how humans behave
Right.
and reshape our relationship with time and value.
It's pretty incredible to watch unfold.
Now let's shift gears a bit.
Oh.
Talk about how investors think about Bitcoin from an information perspective.
Yeah.
Our sources highlighted some really interesting stuff here.
Yeah.
There's this big emphasis on going beyond the headlines and digging into the raw data.
I love the DIY ethos in the Bitcoin community.
Yeah.
People are encouraged to do their own research,
Right.
question everything,
Yeah.
and form their own conclusions. It's so different from passively consuming information.
It is.
Which is what happens in most other areas of finance.
Yeah, it's like Bitcoin forces you to become a critical thinker.
That's a great way to put it.
You have to be your own analyst,
Mm-hmm.
your own researcher, your own fact checker.
Right, and that can be really empowering. It changes your whole relationship with information.
And you see this emphasis on independent thought.
Yeah.
In the types of sources that Bitcoin investors rely on.
Yeah.
They're not just reading mainstream news or listening to talking heads on TV.
Right.
They're diving into research reports, exploring blockchain data, having deep conversations online.
They're going straight to the source, cutting through all the noise.
Yeah, and our sources actually highlighted a couple specific resources.
Oh, yeah.
Like Alliance Bernstein's Black Book and BlackRock's presentations on Bitcoin.
Those are excellent examples.
As examples of the high-quality information that's out there.
They are.
If you're willing to put in the effort to find it.
Yeah, you got to go beyond just the surface-level stuff.
And don't forget about the footnotes.
Oh, yeah, the footnotes.
They often have these hidden gems of information that help you understand the context and nuance of an argument.
It's those little details
that
often reveal the most important insights.
And here's a pro tip for our listeners.
Okay.
Don't just read stuff you agree with.
Yeah.
Seek out dissenting voices.
Right.
Challenge your own assumptions. Be open to changing your mind.
Absolutely.
That's how you grow as an investor
and
as a person.
It's about recognizing that we all have blind spots.
Yeah.
And being humble enough to admit when we're wrong. The best investors are constantly learning, constantly evolving.
Speaking of being wrong,
okay.
One mistake that people make when they're evaluating investments is forgetting about inflation.
Yeah, that's a big one.
In a world where prices are always going up,
right,
it's critical to understand how inflation can eat away at your savings.
Yeah.
Your investments over time.
Absolutely. It's so important.
Our sources really hammered home the importance of understanding real returns, which is the return on your investment. After you account for inflation.
It's a simple concept.
It is.
But so easy to overlook.
Yeah.
Especially if you're new to investing.
And this is where that idea of those risk-free assets, like bonds and cash, really starts to crumble.
It does, because if your safe investments are earning less than inflation, you're actually losing purchasing power over time.
It's like that slow leak in your tire again. I love that analogy.
You might not notice it at first.
Right.
But eventually it's going to leave you stuck on the side of the road.
Exactly. It's a great way to think about it.
Inflation is like this silent thief.
Yeah.
That can steal your wealth without you even knowing it's happening.
That's why it's so important to think about assets that can actually beat inflation.
Yeah.
Things like Bitcoin, real estate, certain commodities.
And here's another challenge.
Okay.
A lot of those traditional economic models, they don't really factor in future policy changes.
They don't?
Unexpected events, things that can totally throw a wrench in the works.
Right, like a black swan event.
Exactly.
Something that comes out of nowhere and changes everything. Yeah. Which makes it incredibly hard to predict how inflation's going to play out.
It does.
Especially in the years ahead.
Yeah, we're in uncharted territory.
You are.
The old rules might not apply anymore.
One approach I thought was really interesting came from Sam Callahan.
Okay.
He uses the money supply growth rate. Currently, it's hovering around 7 or 8%.
Right.
As his own personal inflation benchmark.
I like that.
It's a simple but effective way to gauge how quickly the dollar's losing its value.
It is. It's like having a built-in BS detector.
I love that.
For all those overly optimistic economic forecasts.
That pretend inflation's just going to vanish overnight.
Right.
Yeah.
It's about being realistic.
Being pragmatic.
Recognizing that inflation is a force to be reckoned with.
And it seems like more and more people are starting to see that.
They are.
Even those in mainstream finance.
Yeah.
It feels like we might be entering a new era of structurally higher inflation.
Yeah, with all this government debt, supply chain problems, demographic shifts. It really does feel like the perfect storm for rising prices.
So it sounds like we need some bold new thinking.
We do.
Some out-of-the-box solutions. And maybe a little healthy paranoia about the future of the dollar.
I agree.
Now, before we dive into the potential risks of Bitcoin, I want to go back to something we were discussing earlier.
Okay.
This psychological shift that we're seeing with some corporate CFOs.
Right. You mean that whole dollar is a liability thing?
Yeah, it's like they're waking up from a long dream, realizing that the currency they've trusted for so long is actually losing its value.
Yeah, it's a pretty big realization.
It is.
And it's pushing them to search for alternatives.
Like Bitcoin.
Exactly.
And this isn't just happening at a few fringe companies.
Right.
We're seeing this at major corporations.
Yeah.
Investment banks, sovereign wealth funds.
It's pretty wrong.
So it's like the floodgates are opening.
They are?
And institutional money is starting to pour into Bitcoin.
Yeah. And this trend is being fueled by a growing understanding of what makes Bitcoin unique.
It's scarcity. It's decentralization. It's resistance to censorship.
Those qualities are becoming more and more attractive.
Yeah.
In a world that's full of so much uncertainty.
So for our listeners who are still on the fence about Bitcoin, this might be a sign to pay attention.
It could be.
The so-called smart money is moving.
Yeah.
And those who wait too long might miss the boat.
It's possible.
But of course, it's always important to approach any investment with a healthy dose of skepticism.
Absolutely.
Do your own research before you make any decisions.
Always.
And that brings us to the topic of risks.
Right.
Bitcoin does have risks.
It does.
It's important to understand those before you invest a single dollar.
Our sources pointed out a few key areas to consider.
First, there's the risk of human error.
Right.
Bitcoin is a complex system.
It is.
And there's always a chance that a software bug or a developer's mistake could have unintended consequences.
That's always a possibility.
Second, there's the risk of external attacks.
Right.
While the Bitcoin network itself is incredibly secure,
It is.
exchanges, other third-party service providers, can be vulnerable to hacking and theft.
That's true.
So it's crucial to choose reputable platforms, secure platforms for your Bitcoin.
Absolutely.
And third, there's the risk of government regulation.
Right.
Governments all over the world are still trying to figure out how to handle Bitcoin.
They are?
There's a chance they could impose restrictions that make it harder to buy, sell, or use Bitcoin.
It's a real possibility.
It's important to stay informed about how regulations are changing,
Right.
understand the potential risks. But even with all these risks,
Yeah.
Bitcoin has shown incredible resilience over the years.
It has.
It's survived multiple challenges, attacks, and come out stronger every time.
It's like the more people try to stop it, the stronger it gets.
And as the technology matures, more people adopt it, these risks are likely to decrease.
Hopefully.
So for a listener who's thinking about investing in Bitcoin, what are some steps they can take to minimize these risks?
Well, the first thing I would say is start small.
Okay.
Don't invest more than you can afford to lose.
Good advice.
Second, use a hardware wallet
Okay.
to store your Bitcoin offline. That's the most secure way to protect yourself from hacking.
Right.
Third, diversify your holdings.
Okay.
Don't put all your eggs in one basket. Consider investing in other assets as well, like gold, real estate, or stocks.
Alongside Bitcoin.
Exactly.
And finally, do your own research.
Absolutely.
Don't just take someone else's word for it. Learn about the technology, understand the risks, the potential rewards before you make any decisions.
Those are all great tips.
Yeah.
And remember, investing is a marathon, not a sprint.
I like that.
Be patient. Stay disciplined. Don't let your emotions, like fear or greed, control your decisions.
And if you're feeling lost or unsure, don't hesitate to reach out to a qualified financial advisor.
Someone you trust who can help you navigate this complex world.
Now, we've been laser focused on Bitcoin.
Yeah.
But it's important to remember that the world of digital assets is much bigger than just one cryptocurrency.
Absolutely. There are tons of other cryptocurrencies out there.
Yeah.
And many of them are working on really innovative solutions.
In areas like what?
Well, things like decentralized finance, supply chain management, digital identity. It's an exciting space to watch.
It's moving so fast.
Incredibly fast.
How can our listeners keep up with everything that's going on?
Well, I'd recommend following thought leaders on social media.
Okay.
Subscribing to industry newsletters.
Yeah.
Attending conferences.
Good advice.
And of course, you can always count on the deep dive to keep you informed.
That's a great plug.
Haha.
As we wrap up our deep dive into Bitcoin, inflation, and alternative investments, I want to leave our listeners with one final thought.
Okay, sure.
We've talked a lot about the financial side of Bitcoin, But it's important to remember that it's much more than just an investment.
It is.
It's a social movement.
Yeah.
A technological revolution. A philosophical challenge to the way things are.
It's about empowering individuals.
Yeah.
Achieving financial freedom. Creating a more equitable and sustainable world.
It's a story that's still being written.
It is.
And we can all be a part of it.
We can.
So I encourage you to explore the world of Bitcoin and digital assets.
Yeah.
With an open mind, a sense of curiosity.
You might be surprised by what you discover.
You might.
You never know.
Yeah.
You might even find yourself becoming a Bitcoin believer.
Okay, before we go,
Mm-hmm.
I want to circle back to one thing from our sources that I found really interesting.
Oh, yeah. What's that?
It's about stablecoins. They're this strange kind of hybrid of, traditional finance and the crypto world.
Right. Like they're trying to have it both ways.
Yeah, but the thing that really got me thinking was the argument that stablecoins could actually strengthen the dollar globally.
Yeah, that's a weird one, right?
Yeah.
The idea is that stablecoins make U.S. dollars more accessible digitally.
Yeah.
Which could actually increase demand for them around the world.
It's wild.
It is.
Especially when so many people see Bitcoin as like this threat to the dollar's dominance.
It's a real head scratcher, isn't it?
It is. But then again, we've seen throughout this whole deep dive that the old rules of finance just don't seem to apply anymore.
You really don't.
Things are moving so fast.
They are.
It's almost impossible to predict how these new technologies will change the global monetary system.
It's like we're all strapped into this roller coaster.
I like that.
And nobody knows where it's headed.
Exactly.
That's why it's more important than ever to think critically.
Yeah.
And never stop learning. We can't just cling to those old assumptions.
Yeah.
Outdated models.
Right.
You got to be adaptable, stay informed, keep our minds open to new possibilities.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Well, there you have it.
That's a perfect note to end on.
It is.
So thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the world of Bitcoin, inflation, and alternative investments.
It's been a pleasure.
We've covered a lot of ground today.
We have.
But this is really just the beginning of your journey.
Yeah, keep exploring.
Keep asking those tough questions. And never stop learning.
The future of finance is being shaped right now.
It is.
And it's a really exciting time to be a part of it.
Until next time on The Deep Dive.